First, welcome everybody to League Day. League Days are the opportunity to inform our members about issues of high priority that will be on the legislative agenda. We and our co-sponsors focus on ensuring that our local and national governments work as equitably as possible. The philosophy that governs us has led many leagues across the nation to study the criminal justice system. We are in an era of mass incarceration, which disproportionately affects Black communities. Far too many justice-involved individuals emerge from custody lacking employable skills or housing, or suffering from drug abuse, resulting in the vast majority being reincarcerated. This is clearly costly, ineffectual, and unjust. Recognizing this led us to begin a study to look at best practices, to talk to stakeholders, to determine whether there was a better way of operating. We developed a position that we can now act upon, and that was adopted nationally in 2021. A stated goal of this position is that a just criminal justice system must have, quote, a focus on humane treatment and rehabilitation with the goal of promoting successful re-entry into communities, end quote. Prompted by SB4, which Senator Pinckney introduced this session to reform our state's probationary system, the League has brought together 4 amazing panelists who can describe what the system has looked like, what it feels like now, and what its future could be. Unfortunately, the Department of Corrections perspective is missing. They were asked but declined to participate. I'm going to introduce the panelists very briefly in the order in which they'll speak. They will then have an opportunity to speak to each other, raise a question, and then there will be an opportunity for the audience to enter a chat and provide a question there, and we will have, I hope to have time for as many questions as possible. Our first panelist is Hanif Salam. He manages the ACLU's Campaign for Smart Justice to empower people impacted by the criminal justice system, as he himself was. Following him is the Honorable Charles Butler, who, after serving as Delaware's Chief Attorney General, became a judge of the Superior Court in 2012 and now runs the Superior Court Reentry Program. Our next panelist is Anthony Stanzio, the Director of Vocational Services at the Delaware Center for Justice. He encourages employers to hire system-involved individuals as second chance employers and provides job training. Finally, Senator Marie Pinckney, who chairs the Senate Corrections and Public Safety Committee, will explain how the bill she authored, SB4, will help justice-involved individuals re-enter the community successfully. Hanif, will you begin?
Hanif, before you start, can I just let people know that since people will be speaking one after the other, as you have a question in your mind, put it in the chat to Martha Gessler. She's going to be gathering all the questions for the end. So just chat it to Martha Gessler. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hanif.
Thank you, Marjorie, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me to be on this panel this evening, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining. As stated, my name is Hanif Salam, and I am the manager of the Smart Justice Campaign. And I was led to this work through my lived experiences. Born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware, I did make a mistake back in 1999 while attending college at DSU. I was selling drugs to be able to have money to support myself through college, and ended up being convicted for a felony drug charge. And I'd say the most challenging thing about my journey after being convicted of that drug charge was my experience on probation. After receiving that initial charge, I didn't see a full year on the streets. I was incarcerated on 4 separate occasions for technical violations of probation. I could remember one occurrence was for having positive urine screenings for marijuana, right? I can remember one instance I was violated because I was missing curfews. And again, testing positive for marijuana. But I think one of the most devastating things that happened when I got violated for probation was when I was able to control my marijuana usage. I was able to obtain full-time employment. But I was also sentenced to a program called TASK, which is a drug treatment program. And because I was working full-time hours, often 45, 50 hours a week at Foot Locker, it was like my first real job. When I went to a status hearing, TASK counselors said that they did not have a recommendation for me because they felt like that I was not prioritizing TASK, although I had flowed down from level 3 probation to level 2. And for people who aren't familiar, that's just a lower level of supervision. And I maintained a job for over 6 months. TASK got me sent back. So although my urine was clean, I had a job, I was doing everything I was supposed to do, I wasn't meeting satisfactory expectations of TASK. And that was really devastating because it caused me to lose that first real job that I ever had. And after that, after coming home after that experience, I decided to have a career to help people. And that's exactly what I've done ever since. I mean, going back to over 10 years ago, I was a part of the Delaware Reentry Consortium that influenced Governor Markell to start IADAP, which created communication across our 5 departments and started to have reentry plans for individuals coming home. After that, I'd worked with organizations like DCJ, which Anthony is at now. I also had the opportunity to work with the Wilmington Hope Commission, where I really got a chance to see how probation could work in a different way. Through the reentry court program, which I'm sure Judge Butler is going to talk more about, I had an opportunity to watch what happens when you prioritize the services for individuals as opposed to incarceration. I had an opportunity to see how graduated sanctions within the Department of Corrections and their probation system could work effectively. And graduated sanctions are really, in short, punishments or consequences for not following the rules that are not incarceration. Oftentimes, incarceration comes after you failed to comply and you've been given multiple graduated sanctions, right? So I seen this work because I seen guys go through the reentry court program in 6 to 9 months doing everything that they needed to do and going off to be productive citizens in life. I've done it. I'm an example of it, and there are many, many others. So this is why I do the work that I do. And now in my role as a Smart Justice Campaign Manager, I'm doing all I can to support Senator Pinckney and her efforts to get SB 4 passed. And that is crucial to me because if you don't know, you need to know that Delaware remains the most incarcerated state in the US Northeast corridor, with incarceration rates higher than Connecticut, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and DC, and most other states on the East Coast. The major driver of Delaware's mass incarceration system is the revolving door between probation and prison. Probation was designed to be an alternative to incarceration, but this system has become a series of traps that lock people back up, often for technical violations like missing an appointment or failing a drug test. Reincarceration is destructive to Delaware families and communities, destroys hard-earned progress made by those on probation, and costs the state millions of dollars, and does nothing to make our communities safer. It is good to point out in these conversations that in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic upended life worldwide and in Delaware, impacting the state's probation system in many ways. And one of the ways, there were temporary changes to the probation system in response to the pandemic that reduced the probation population and the number of people sent back to prison from probation. As a result, the strain on resources was reduced, allowing people to continue their reentry journey with fewer barriers, all while maintaining public safety. SB 4 makes those improvements permanent and a part of the new normal. And it's also good to know that SB 4 will preserve the court's authority to address new criminal behaviors, such as committing a new crime, and preserving public safety and meeting the specific needs of a given case. So I'm just glad today to be here on this panel, to be able to share my lived experiences and the importance of us coming together to ensure that SB 4 is passed. And this legislation will be implemented to help reduce the number of people on probation and reduce the number of people in Delaware prisons.
Thank you. Thank you, honey. Thank you so much. The Honorable Charles Butler, we would love to hear from you, Judge.
Well, I'd love to speak to you. And my name is Charles Butler. I'm the resident judge in Newcastle County in Superior Court. I think I'm here because I run the reentry program for the court. And I have been doing that for about 7 or 8 years now. And my court has undergone a change in direction from its previous iteration. When it began, it was called Intensive Supervision Program. And as an intensive supervision program, it had multiple agencies involved. The hearings were quite cumbersome because Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Corrections were all in the room. It was quite informal, but it was not uncommon for people to get arrested in the courtroom and hauled out for different technical reasons. When I took the court over, I had not asked the question previously, what does it take to get people not to go back to prison? What is the forgetting whether this is a particularly liberal or conservative viewpoint, what works? What is effective at keeping people from going back to prison? And that really became the mantra and the lodestar for what I became interested in, and have spent more than a few weekends just reading Bureau of Justice Assistance Studies, academic research, and on and on. And in the middle of all that research, I met Charles Madden and Jim Elder, who really stood the Hope Achievement Center up from its foundations. Found out that Jim Elder and I had very, very similar interests when our free time. That is, we had no life. We just researched what works in reducing recidivism. And we had a lot of common bonds. So I decided to abandon the use of multiple agencies, because the Hope Achievement Center, as Hanif and Anthony and Maria Whiting can attest, its intent was to become a one-stop shop where you could get all of the services needed for successful reentry. I don't know that it's achieved that completely, but it has achieved case managers who are very adept. If they can't provide the service directly, they can certainly direct the probationer to appropriate services. But I realized through that very often the key to a successful probation lies in the attitudes and the approach taken by those who to whom the probationer is accountable. And by that I mean that our thing is we need 3 positives for every negative. So anytime I'm talking to a guy who has a problem, I dutifully check off at least a couple of things to say good about the last few weeks. I see them every 2 weeks before I drop the bad news of what's gone wrong. We're focused on those things that we know are most highly correlated with recidivist behaviors. We call them criminogenic risk factors. That is, risk factors that are most likely to end up in someone ending up back in jail. So I'm focused on housing. I'm focused on jobs. I'm focused on the absence of substance abuse, and I'm focused on family life and whether or not you're with positive peers. And what I often see is young men who will have good moves, good motions in some areas, but other areas are lacking. So it's always 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And one of the things that a humane and benign system has to do is appreciate that not everybody progresses in a straight line and with perfect cadence. So you have to understand that take a win where you get a win, and understand that your loss is just an opportunity for another success next time. This requires, on the part of the case managers, and I hope Anthony talks about the amount of patience that you have to work with this population, but also the absolutely tremendous reward that comes from having an interpersonal relationship with a young man who's struggling, and who through the efforts of the case managers and the court and the probation office and any resource we can bring to graduate guys out after a successful run is the best day of my month. So Senator Pinckney was kind enough to visit us for a hearing. We had a terrific discussion afterwards. I very much enjoy her leadership on the subject. I want to caution that I am not here as the court endorsing any particular legislation. I frankly that's not in my job description. So I can't endorse any specific legislation. But as a person in this space, do I think we need probation reform? There's no question. There's no question. And I would think that if probation were asked, probation would say we can do better, because I know we can. I know we can get better results. Whether this legislation or other legislation is what it takes, I can't say. I just know that I find this work the most rewarding work that I do as a judge, and I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to say hello to everybody, particularly a lot of old friends out there.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, we're going to move. Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Anthony and hear about some of the specifics day by day in helping people avoid recidivism.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Stanziel, and I am the Director of Vocational Services for the Delaware Center for Justice. Those of you that may not be familiar with what the Delaware Center for Justice does, we have multiple divisions that we cover across the entire state that assist individuals at any entry and exit point in justice involvement. So we have a youth school diversion program that works to kind of assist youth who are deemed at risk in the schools, or maybe going through some persistent conflict, where we have individuals who work within our schools to be able to help find the appropriate interventions as an alternative to suspension. We have a transitional reentry program that works with the prisons to be able to coordinate services for those high-risk individuals who are coming home with no housing, who are coming home and need some intensive mental health and substance abuse placement and support services. Those individuals who work in that division will actually also work with those individuals for up to 90 days post-release. And it's headed by one of our case managers and 3 peers who work throughout the entire state, basically driving to the prison gates, picking up individuals, driving them to wherever they need to go, assisting them with job interviews, clothing, food, doctor's appointments, anything that is of high priority. We have a regular case management division where we have a case manager in each of the probation offices throughout the entire state of Delaware, where officers can refer individuals to our case management to do exactly what Judge Butler was talking about, to be able to help assist individuals in reducing those barriers toward a successful reentry. And then we have an adult victim services division that works with adult victims of crime, as well as the expungement services through our systems navigator, Tally Nichols. He works throughout the state to be able to help individuals who are off of probation and parole get their expungements, their pardons. DCJ will cover the cost of any paperwork associated with those, and then be able to work with individuals through the legal process to be able to make sure that those expungements and pardons, either they go through, or if it's not the correct route, to be able to guide them in that right route. I'm very blessed to be working with DCJ. I'm also very blessed to be I've had the opportunity to work in reentry in the past 5 years in Delaware. Currently, I serve as the director of vocational services. And what that entails is that I work in each of the probation offices. I take my blue Kia and I drive up and down the state, and I do a residency in each of the offices where I offer education and employment services. That ranges from job training, job placement, career coaching and job coaching, educational consultation, working with the Department of Corrections to obtain education records from the actual prison institutions, and then figuring out a next step forward. Prior to working with the Delaware Center for Justice, I worked as an in-reach coordinator at the Wilmington Hope Commission and a case manager for a brief period of time. And my job would physically be to go into the prisons and speak with individuals prior to coming out about the benefits of case management that the Hope Commission offered, as well as the benefits of trying to figure out a solid reentry plan for that individual, and aligning the resources prior to their release. I think the biggest barrier that I see in this day-to-day work is one, the revolving door of individuals who may recidivate in the midst of their current probation term, or more specifically, those individuals who have a successful completion of probation. And in that first year to 3 years afterwards, they're not able to put the pieces together. They may lose their job. They may have a housing need that is immediate after they successfully complete a program like reentry court, or they're off of probation, and they don't have any of those day-to-day reporting obligations. And then all of a sudden, the rug's pulled out from under them, and okay, I need to find housing. I need to find a new job. I need to be able to afford childcare. This is the real life issues that kind of come up. And then seeing those individuals go back to kind of old patterns and old behaviors of things that are able to make money and things that are able to meet your initial needs, the recidivism rate for those individuals is something that really affects me. I was a school teacher for 12 years prior, so I'm the only individual in the state, or one of the only individuals in the state, that sees reentry ages 13 through 96. And the fact that we have a 96-year-old on probation is another story. And seeing those individuals who I taught, who then struggled in school and were often suspended, who then went through one of the programs where I'm a youth advocate. I'm a one-on-one advocate for some youth in the community through youth advocate programs. They go through that program, successfully complete, recidivate, get into our adult program at DCJ, the Delaware Center for Justice. I see them for job services. I refer them for case management. And then in the midst of that, there's the issue of stability. There's the issue of barrier reduction. There's the issue of, am I going to complete probation? And then seeing them as adults going through the system, or even worse, having a youth and a family member, an adult, an aunt, an uncle, both on my caseload. Delaware is one of those states where everybody knows everybody, and it's a 2 degree of separation, and that is very, very true in the reentry field. So one of the things that I do, especially with my job training and job placement services, is in order to reduce at least the education and employment barrier, is I go out and I speak with individuals in different corporations and different organizations, from mom and pop businesses all the way up to the Amazons. And I say, will you hire individuals for second chance employment? And there's a big difference between those companies that say, you know what, we really don't know. We don't have a policy. We would love to try something out. We would love to partner with you and see what works. I do the job training. I vet individuals. I make sure that there's support services that come afterwards. If it doesn't work out, no harm, no foul. Like, we know that this is something that we're trying to build standards and touch points for. But a lot of organizations out there will say that they're open to second chance employment because they can get a tax write-off. They can get a tax credit for individuals. And then the moment that they slip up, or the moment that that individual has a priority like substance abuse and mental health counseling, they have reentry court, they have to go to probation. Those businesses use that as, and they weaponize that, and they use that as a means to let that individual go. And now not only do you have a gap in employment, but you're also back at square one. We're like, I've lost my job. Now the money that I had to pay off my fees and fines, or the money that I had to be able to pay towards my license that I can't get released because I owe child support, or back money to the state, I now have this other barrier that is immediate that I need to fill. And before my position, the way to fill that barrier was either through service organizations or through probation and parole. And truthfully, probation and parole were overwhelmed being able to try to manage all of these services. My client needs housing. My client needs to do their intake at task. My client has a DUI course that they have to fill out. My client doesn't have an ID or social security card. My client needs work. Now multiply that by 10, you can't manage all of those. So I'm very blessed to be able to work with the Delaware Center for Justice, to be able to be the person to kind of be the gatekeeper when it comes to employment and education, and help out where I can with case management. I'm definitely the boots on the ground person who goes from Seaford all the way up to Newcastle County. And I'm just trying to break bread with companies, trying to get in the door, trying to change cultures where we're not sending people to chicken plants and to temp jobs, because that's also it's not a sustainable living. So I definitely know that some of the work that I've done at the Hope Commission and with DCJ, with Hanif, Maria Whiting, Judge Charles Butler, like we are the people on the ground who, when you ask, how is this client, what's their demeanor like, what are the barriers they're facing. It's often in that story that's not told if you look at their rap sheet, or you look at a printout of kind of their criminal history or their background. But it's the successes and it's the way that they overcome those barriers that's the beauty of this job. And I want people to kind of latch onto that. It isn't business, these are people.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. That was very eloquent. Finally, we've all referred in some way to probation. And I would like Senator Pinckney to please tell us about what works, what doesn't work, what her bill would do if it is successfully passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. And thank you all for inviting me. The League of Women Voters is definitely a powerhouse. And so it is an honor to be here with you all this evening, especially on this esteemed panel. This might have been one of the best put together panels I've been on. You've got some real heavy hitters here this evening. So this is a great way to spend a 7 o'clock on a Tuesday after a crazy session day.
Yes.
So thank you for getting me amongst a good group of people this evening to talk about a really, really important topic. And you asked me to tell you what is not working, but I don't think I need to go too much into that because I think that you heard that from all of the speakers this evening. You heard so much of the problems within the system. And I think as a senator, it's my honor to be able to have these conversations, to listen to people, and that the people that, like Anthony said, are the boots on the ground, and hear what's not working, and then be able to work on legislation alongside them that addresses the things that aren't working. Excuse me, Marjorie, when you were speaking, you talked about the motto that you all have of a focus on humane treatment. And when I think about Senate Bill 4, that is the intention of that bill, is to create a probation system that it focuses on the humanity of people. And understanding that none of us are our worst mistakes, and that had it not been for some of us for privilege, for access, our worst mistakes would land us in a lot of the same scenarios and situations for the people that we're advocating for this evening. And so again, I'm really excited to be able to talk with you all about Senate Bill 4. It is the product of a lot of really hard work over the last year and some change between myself, between the ACLU, DCJ, and so many other amazing advocates and organizations that have gotten behind this bill. And so I'm excited to break it down for you all. It's a really long bill. It's about 18 pages. And it is the culmination, honestly, of a lot of the hard work of the ACLU, who has been doing the work in this space for a really long time. I always really love to share the story of how I became the sponsor of Senate Bill 4. And many of you know that I'm a social worker in my other hat. And I was working at the hospital one Sunday afternoon, and I was listening to the Highlands Bunker podcast where Rob was talking about level 1 restitution only probation. And I was not at the time familiar with restitution only probation. And so I'm like, wow, we're keeping people under supervision for dollars. And it was infuriating to me. And so I went down a rabbit hole of Googling and trying to learn more. I was supposed to be at work. Please don't tell Christiane to care. But I was doing some research, just trying to understand this system a little more. And I came across the ACLU's People Not Prison report that really broke down probation to me in a way that was really frustrating, but also really easily understandable. And so I text Javon at the time, who works at the ACLU, and I was telling her how excited I am about the fact that they had this report, and that not only did they have the report, but they had the recommendations on how we need to fix it. And I was just like, well, let's go, let's run the bill, let's do it. And Javon texts me back and she's like, I'm really excited that you're reading our probation report, but it's Sunday, please take some time off. And so that was almost a year and a half ago now. And since then, we really did hit the ground running and put this bill together. And it addresses so many of the issues that you heard about tonight. And I was thinking about what Anthony was saying about, all of the hard work that they have put in to be able to work with companies and get people to say that they want to hire people who have a justice informed background and give people a chance and an opportunity, but then to turn around and hear about, Hanif's story with finally finding that job and then having it taken away because of the conditions of probation. And he acknowledged that there were mistakes made. But at the same time, if you are doing your best, if you are owning your mistakes, why are we putting people in a position to be reincarcerated and then come back out and have to start all over again? And so that's one of the things that Senate Bill 4 seeks to address, is moving probation to a least restrictive model, so that people, the first reaction is not putting people back in prison, that the first recommendation coming from DOC is not for people to go back to prison, and that once they get to the other courts, that the first reaction is not prison, and that the idea is that, can we use those graduated sanctions that Hanif talked about? They've been proven to work. And so can we, if a person needs, extra support, can we look at curfews? Can we look at electronic monitoring if necessary? Can we look at extra supports in programming, that if a person is struggling with substance abuse, that they're getting referred back to programming? And can we stop having the first idea that people need to go back to prison and upend all of the hard work that they have made? Because again, we're not all our worst mistakes. And if people are out and they're doing their best, we should be giving them support and not taking away the services and things that they surrounded themselves with. And so again, one of the first things that's looking at is stopping reincarceration for technical violations. Senate Bill 4 also is limiting probation to 1 year. And so we're trying to, again, kind of come away from the idea that people need to be extensively monitored for significant periods of time post-incarceration. We're looking for, the bill will also create more support for people to actively get programming, as far as financial support with that, because programs can cost a lot of money. So when people are getting substance abuse treatment, or when people are having to go to domestic violence classes, those classes can be really expensive. And so looking for opportunities for DOC to kind of take on some of that cost burden, as well as DOC kind of operating in more of a case management role, like we've seen from our community partners who do amazing case management roles. We're going to be looking to DOC to be helping people to get into those programs. Sometimes those programs have really, really long waiting lists. And so it's not really conducive to put people on really long waiting lists for programs and then requiring them to stay on probation for months and months and months, not because they weren't able to finish the program, but because they never got into it. And so looking for DOC to take on some of the responsibility of making sure people have access and understanding on how to get to those programs, and that DOC will also assist people when they don't have the transportation. And so we'll be looking to make some changes there. There will be increased representation at the violation hearings. So our friends at ODS are in the queue, and so they'll be looking to provide more representation and support to people when they're going before the courts to have those technical violations heard, and increasing the flexibility of which people are able to check in and have some of those hearings and check-ins. Like Hanif talked about, during COVID, we learned that we do not necessarily need to all be in each other's faces physically every single day. Sometimes we can just hop on a Zoom for a quick chat, check in with our probation officers, check in with the courts, and then keep it moving. And so when Anthony does his good work of getting people those jobs, but people don't need to leave work in the middle of the day to go to a court hearing and sit in a court all day for a 15-minute hearing. They can utilize Zoom for that. Maybe looking at the fact that people went to two treatment program classes today. And so do they really need to have another 15-minute check-in with their probation officer? Could the attendance at those treatment programs count as a check-in with the probation officer for the day? Having the probation officer be more flexible about when and where they're able to meet people is going to be an important part of the conversation as well. something that sounds silly, but is actually in there because it's in code right now, is removing the requirement for people to have permission to get married when they're on probation, because that's in code right now. And so we'll be taking that out. It's a small piece of the bill, but it's still in there. And so we'll be removing those requirements as well. And then one of my favorite parts, because I am a nerd, is the technology piece of the bill. The last couple of pages really address data collection and how we will, and the type of reporting and collection that we'll be doing. Now I have to pause here and tell you that right now, as the bill stands, there will be an amendment coming to the bill, and it will actually remove that technology piece. And the reason that it's going to remove the technology and data collection piece is because right now the state is just not set up technologically to be able to collect any of that data. I remember sitting with Judge Butler that day when I came to observe the courts, and he told me about all the things that they're still handwriting. And I was just like, what do you mean? I'm a millennial. Why are we handwriting anything? And it drove me crazy. And so, but you know, that conversation with Judge Butler really helped inform me just how kind of backdated some of the technology is in the state. And so thinking fiscally from what it would require for us to get the courts and the DOC and all of the other agencies up to a place where we're able to collect that data just didn't seem like something that we should take on in this bill. And so instead, what we're going to do is remove those last couple of pages of the bill and create a task force that's going to help us study how we can get the state's technology up to date in a way that will allow us to collect that data moving forward. I will also put a really great plug in for the Statistical Analysis Center here, who is actually doing some upgrading on their own under a project called Project Cascade. That is actually them, so they've already kind of gone ahead and started figuring out how they can do their own kind of system overhaul, which is really exciting. And so the task force will be working in tandem with them and all of the agencies to figure out what else needs to be done so that we put the state on track to be able to continuously upgrade technology in a way that stops us from having to every 15, 20 years figure out why we're still working on archaic dinosaur systems. And so I'm really excited about that. I know sometimes when we talk about task force, we think of them as places where good things go to die, but this is actually a task force I'm really excited about. I think it's one that's going to be really important. And I think when we're looking at a budget shortfall in the way that we are right now in this year, I think it's a really good idea to be able to figure out how we do this in a sustainable way and figure out where the money is going to come from, because we know that it's not going to be cheap to upgrade the state systems. What am I missing? Also thinking about the amendment, there will be some other kind of changes just based on conversations that we've been having about some of the things that might make ODS's work a little bit easier when it comes to the recognizance hearings that are in the bill, which is the representation that I talked about. So there'll be some slight changes coming there. I can't give too much information on that yet because I'm still waiting on some of the draft language to see how we're going to change that. But there's some changes coming there. And I think I will be quiet right there and just tell you the only other thing that I think is really exciting. The bill has 16 co-sponsors right now. And so there is a lot of support around this. And I definitely credit to the work of the organizations like League of Women Voters and 100% ACLU also and DCJ for reaching out to legislators and encouraging them to take a look at the bill, to have conversations about the bill, being willing to sit down with people and legislators and advocate in support of this bill. So, you know, my name gets to be the one that's the first on the paper, but it's definitely not because I'm the one that's done all or the hardest of the work around it. It's been really, really a team effort among so many amazing organizations like you all. And I really, really appreciate your willingness to listen, to engage in these conversations, to advocate around the criminal justice system, and to acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of flaws there. But if we can continue to work together and continue to have these conversations, we can eventually change this system. And when we change this system for the good 100%, I can retire. I'll leave it there. And yes, I am talking about retirement. I get to talk about it too.
Well, we don't want you to retire for a long, long time. And
Well,
I have to say, you've done a beautiful job both with the bill, which the league, as you know, has endorsed and advocated for. But in terms of responding to your colleagues on the panel, I would like to provide a few minutes for panelists to ask or comment about anything that was said before we ask some other general questions. Are there any comments from the?
Sure. I think I'd like to throw one to Anthony. Anthony, one of the glaring deficiencies at probation, or at least particularly the transition from level 5 to the street, is the lack of a good, safe, smooth handoff. We addressed this in the reentry coalition meetings, and I understood, and maybe my ears misheard, that DOC was going to hire reentry coordinators to work inside the level 5 units to set up basically IADAP. When you're 60, 90 days out from your depart date, they'll tell us where you're going to live. They'll work on driver's licenses and some social security card, so that when the defendant comes out, he has some orientation. You mentioned that you're now doing case management services through probation. So my question is, are the case management services you're doing the ones that they're talking about? In other words, did they contract that out to DCJ, or do they have their own people that are doing case management for reentry inside the prisons at level 5?
It's a little of both. So there are people who are working through that modified IADAPT services. They're working, it's the Centurion team. They're working to identify the needs for those individuals who are medium to high risk, who have multiple presenting factors. Where DCJ comes in is that Centurion will identify from those individuals who they're working with. They'll say, Johnny is coming out on Tuesday. Johnny needs to go, we've identified as part of his plan to go right from here to a residential step down program, or right from here to this housing program that we've identified for him because of the things that we were able to accomplish and set up while we were in here working with him. And those that when he hits the streets, we want to make sure that he follows through on those with fidelity. The hard part with that comes in, and I think Hanif and Judge Butler, you both can speak to this, is when we have those surprise releases where somebody's status changes very quickly, where they're released, or their release date gets pushed up, and they don't have, on the DOC side, they may not have identified all of those factors, to which then DCJ is like let's figure it out as soon as they come out. So it's a little of both. We had, like, our transitional team will coordinate as best we can with the Centurion team inside of the facilities to make sure that we implement their transition plan with fidelity. But then there's always those that either slip through the cracks, or there's the ones that hey, we've identified that you're going to live at this residential facility when you get out for housing, and they're like, I don't want to live in a shelter.
Well, and you actually are kind of getting to another point, which is the cracks, right?
Yep.
The cracks are very problematic.
Very.
And Health and Social Services doesn't have a full-on communication with DOC, which doesn't have a full-on with DOL or with DSHA. So all of these different agencies that may touch a reentrant don't touch each other. And, you know, I don't know that the Achievement Center is the model of perfection, but why isn't there a place where the Department of Corrections houses its probation officers and also houses a job counselor and also houses a housing counselor and also houses some treatment providers and also houses, you know, task monitors? Why does a probationer have to run from the Delaware Memorial Bridge to meet his PO and then over to Lancaster Avenue to meet his task officer, and then God knows where to talk to a housing counselor or what have you? It is almost as if, and I know this is not fair to the system, but it's almost as if the system is setting it up to make it harder to successfully reenter. And I don't believe that, but the lack of diligence on our part collectively on making sure that this stuff is easily accessible. You put the probation office under the Delaware Memorial Bridge? Really? I mean, who did that? Anthony, I'm going to blame you.
Please. I'll tell you something too that is equally frustrating, because from the perspective of somebody who had to basically sell the services that we have over at the probation office, is hey, I'm Anthony, I'm that job guy, like send people to me, like physically walk clients over to me so then I can work with them on job training and placement services. You know, it was something new. It was something that if someone in with less of an outgoing personality than me may not have been as successful, someone with less patience as me may not have been as successful. But I say that to say that their probation, with the way that they're receiving our services, they're really latching on. We've served in 8 months, we've served now 712 individuals statewide for employment services. We've placed 89% of them successfully into education or employment. But where I see the cracks, Judge Butler, is not only on those that slip through on the DOC side, but you have these organizations that, I'm going to be really blunt and honest, in 2020, reentry was the hot new thing because everyone was being released in droves from the prison facilities. So everyone wanted a slice of the reentry money in the reentry pie. Everyone wanted to be, I'm doing this reentry, I'm doing this reentry. Now our organization has reentry. And I'm like, can we stop sending clients to 7 different people? Because not only is transportation an issue, but also these are individuals. I don't care if I get credit for them. I don't care if I send them to West End Neighborhood House to because I feel like they have a more intensive job placement program that better suits this client's needs because they can have built-in internships. I don't care that I'm sending them over to the Hope Commission to be able to get that one-on-one case management, right? The biggest flaw, I think, in Delaware is when it comes to who is doing what, it boils down to money and not to people. And it's unfortunate.
I gotta say, I'm really enjoying hearing Anthony and Charles Butler talk about service providing and the gaps in the services. I truly miss it. And being on the technical side, one of the things that is like within this legislation, but I think it goes along with servicing individuals on probation, is preventing incarceration for technical violations, right? And so for anybody that's not familiar, this would be individuals who do not commit a new crime, that for all of the rules and regulations of probation, they may have broken one of the rules. And we want to prevent people from being incarcerated when they break one of these rules, right? So I just wanted to take a minute to hear Judge Butler talk some more. But can you just talk about all that research you do and your experience with reentry court, and just talk about the pros and cons of giving somebody a graduated sanction or letting them stay on the street, or sitting them down saying, oh, you broke a rule, so you go back to jail for 30 days and then come back out. Can you just take a little bit about what would be the best, what you think is the best option for individuals?
Well,
Judge Butler, before you go, can I
Yes.
add something to that? Because I actually had a question for you too, and I think they might
Sure.
marry together well. When you were speaking earlier, you talked about the idea that, and I know you have to be partial, as a member of the judiciary, but you talked about the idea also that there are ways that probation could be better, and as partially as you can you share some of the ideas that you think, what might that look like?
well, that's a great question, and I have a fun answer for you. Let me speak to Hanif for a second. The question of whether or not you incarcerate as a result of a technical violation, I think, is a serious one. I think that most of the brothers and sisters on the bench, one of the first questions they ask is, do you have a job? Because if you have a job, the judge has to know that incarceration jeopardizes the job. Do you have stable housing that you pay the rent? Incarceration jeopardizes, the rent. So certainly I am acutely aware, and I think most judges are aware, that when you're going to use level 5 as a sanction, it's very disruptive. And the disruption itself can lead to another problem, right? So you can end up with cascading violations because you're actually making it worse, not better. I can understand the distaste for the use of imprisonment as a sanction for a technical violation. I'll say, on the other hand, that if you completely close off the availability of level 5 as a sanction, so in other words, that's no longer in the judge's arsenal of choices or probation arsenal of choices, what do we do with the guy who needs to go to rehab and doesn't want to go to rehab? He just doesn't want to go. And you and I can both agree this guy needs rehab. If I can't incarcerate him, we'll call it as an incentive to get him to go to rehab, I have to say, okay, you don't have to go to rehab. If that's my final answer, okay, you don't have to go to rehab, and that word circulates out, then the criminal justice sanction, and believe me, a lot of folks look to criminal justice as a way to enforce. Parents, call their PO and say, my son's got to get to rehab. If we don't have that option, it causes some real problems for the system. I think systemically, we're going to end up with far fewer technicals, because probation is going to say, well, if I can't incarcerate, I can't get enforcement of the rules. So it's like there has to be, an end date. And if you don't like the fact or the perception that judges use it too much or that POs use it too much, go ahead and make that case. But I think to take it off the table completely really eviscerates the power of the criminal justice sanction. Maria, I want to speak to your question directly, because I think I may have shared it with you off channel, but I have been touting a report in the 2005 Prison Journal called an intensive supervision program that worked, service delivery, professional orientation, and organizational supportiveness. Because the reason I'm so impressed with this report is they were able to survey in a state probation officers and learn their orientations, whether they were law enforcement or social work models, and then find those that were in the middle. And they segregated the three groups and looked at what their recidivism rates were depending on the group. And what they find was that the social workers would not write a technical violation. And because they wouldn't write a technical violation, they didn't get many technical violators, but they did get an inordinate number of new charge violators. So by putting their head in the stand and ignoring the technicals, they ended up with more crime violators. The tough guys, the law enforcement guys, found a higher number of technical violations. They were quick to write a technical. Their numbers were less for new crimes, but higher for technicals. What you ended up with was about the same on both sides. It was just in different categories. But then you take the people in the middle, that is a balanced approach between law enforcement and social work. And that's the mystery land. We'll call it Valhalla, because those folks had a recidivism rate of 15%. And I think it was Marjorie who put in the flyer for this thing that nationally, the statistic that's often cited is 70%
That's right.
recidivism. The point is that if you can get probation officers that have a balanced view, that, you know, they don't take nonsense, but they bend when they have to get the job done. Those are the folks that have the lowest recidivism rates. So that is truly, that's the path that you know, that gets to lower recidivism. Now, is that where we want to be? You decide, right? But we know from this study that has results. And now you'd like to know, well, how about Delaware?
Yes, yes.
What are our probation officers like? Are they biased in favor of law enforcement? Are they biased in favor of social work? Well, wouldn't I like to know too?
I'd like to know too, but what I will say is, and I put it in the chat, that reentry court is a great example of that middle ground. For individuals that don't know, there are specific reentry court probation officers. So the probation officers that interact with Judge Butler and with the Woman to Hope Commission Achievement Center, they have a different approach than probation officers who are not a part of the reentry court process. And I think to Judge Butler's part, it's about modernizing our probation system, right? And I agree. I believe if we modernize our probation system, Delaware can not only cut its incarcerated population, but we could reduce crime and recidivism. We can enable better victim restoration through payment of restitution because we're not interfering with people's jobs. We can enhance public safety by focusing on the resources for the people who are most likely to reoffend and focusing on them criminogenic factors that Judge Butler mentioned. We can aid in effective rehabilitation, like Senator Pinckney was talking about. And if we could reduce DOC's budget, we could free up millions of dollars for reinvestment into reentry, education, social services, or whatever the addressed need is.
I'm going to interject for a moment, if I may. I'm moving us away from the end of incarceration to the very beginning and asking, and I know there's no one here representing DOC, but is there any assessment of a person's needs in the first days of incarceration that would give educational opportunities or skill training or substance abuse addressment to facilitate the reentry process? Is there any way that
I don't want to hog the floor. If there's anybody else that wants to take this question, go right ahead. No, when the former iteration of what is now DCRC was in place, our counsel was begin with the end in mind.
Uh-huh.
That was, they said that I don't know how many times. And that was the first time that reentry folks like me started to consider that level 5, that is prison, is the beginning of your reentry path. It doesn't start the day you get out. It
Right.
starts the day you go in. And so for the first time ever, the Department of Corrections undertook a survey of their freshly incarcerated population. They did not even understand the size of the educational job in front of them
Right.
until they started looking at everybody coming through the door. And then they said, holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could have told them, but so, and it's a longer story, but so as I understand where we are with DCRC today, and this is moving around, they are trying to do a needs assessment of all new customers. I should say all sentenced customers, not pretrial detention. But once you've been sentenced, they're trying to get some assessments, educational, but there are lots of others, right? Substance abuse, vocational skills, and so on. That's an ongoing process. Whatever I hear from DOC, I want to go check whether or not that's
Yeah.
actually happening. And so I have not done my due diligence on this statement yet. This is why we need more people involved in this effort.
You know,
If I don't get the mic again, let me make that plug. You folks pushing the system to do better is why this system will get better. It may feel like you're falling on deaf ears, but you can bet that when DOC decides whether they're responding on this call, they're talking to each other about those pesky
yes.
folks out there. And you know, I can certainly see ACLU as a bunch of pesky folks. It's easy, but if you're not pesky, things aren't changing. So however frustrated we all get, we have to keep on and keep up the effort.
And I just wanted to quickly add, Marjorie, I think Judge Butler's assessment is right. I think from my communication to people who are actually incarcerated or recently released, DOC is doing a better job at assessing in the beginning, but providing what they need. DOC doesn't have the capacity. Education classes are full. You got to be sentenced to 10 years or more to get your GED, right? They say that they have opportunities to get college credits, but if you apply to that, they're going to tell you all the slots are full. DOC will tout that they have various vocational training programs within the facilities, and I don't doubt it. But the instructor's ability to train people is limited. And you'll even hear from those vocational training providers that DOC doesn't do much to connect people upon release to ensure they're getting jobs in these fields that they're trained in on the inside. So they are getting better with assessing people. I do think they understand the needs of the people who are housed within facilities in Delaware, but they have not provided the resources to increase capacity to meet the needs of all the
Is there a
individuals.
push, Hanif? Is there a push from the public, perhaps, that rehabilitation has to be the end goal, and that the prisons are an ideal place to provide this if we have the resources for it, and people were allowed, even volunteers, into the prisons to do this work?
Not that I know. When you say is there a push, not that I know of. DOC's website, their mission statement on their website is to rehabilitate people. So I'm going to second Judge Butler's appeal to everybody on this call. And we need people like you to call DOC and demand they allow you to help volunteer to facilitate programs. You demand that they start offering more educational and vocational training to people on the inside. And we have more people from the league and from communities that think like-minded, like the league thinks, then we'll see DOC make those changes.
That's incredible. Just as a point of reference, there has been a major series of articles on San Quentin in California. The governor's push to turn it into a community college, create a whole new learning center, and how impactful that would be in Delaware.
I think I read that they're dropping $26 million on that little project. And, you know, if
Yes.
you show DOC an extra $26 million, you know, things could happen, but
Yeah, without it, it may not. Yes. All right.
we're stuck with baby steps.
Okay.
I will even say instead of looking out, because we can always look outside of the state, but one of the institutions that has done a miraculous growth and turnaround is actually our youth reentry facilities. DSCYF is the Department of Services for Children, Youth, and Their Families, and they inhabit Stevenson House, which is in Milton, right? And then there's the Ferris School for Boys, and then they have the various cottages, Grace Cottage, Snowden Cottage, and Moles Cottage, right over on Centerville Road. So I work as a youth advocate part-time, and I actually do programming inside of all of those facilities, and the amount of not only data collection, but also just wraparound service support that our youth facility workers and our youth program workers are providing for our youth has grown in a response to 2020, 2021, where we were, you know, we had a 67-person youth indictment for all of the violence that was going on in the city. Like, and they had to be quick in responding. We have these hundreds of kids at, you know, in the Newcastle County Detention Center, and we have to figure out what we do with them when they come into these facilities to assess them, get their specific needs, get a treatment team together, get a caseworker together for them. So I almost wish that the adult system would model itself after the changes that the youth system has made.
That's a very interesting point.
I joined this League of Women Voters, and hi, Hanif. It's nice to see you again. I have a long history of working with corrections from almost 30 years ago in the healthcare as a healthcare administrator, and starting the KEY program was administrator then when we started, KEY being the first program. And I'm pretty amazed at listening to where you are now, which is not some of the same discussions that were before. But I also left that and went into prison ministry, which is a volunteer program, and worked through prison ministry with a model that I kind of created myself in working with those inmates who were on probation. And that is following all the things you talked about in probation. That is a job to go in to meet their family and to have them be able to call me at any time. I met with the probation officers and I bargained for them not to reincarcerate them, but give me a couple of more shots with them. And the success rate was phenomenal, as a matter of fact. I still am in communication with them now, and they have a family and are out. And it was because of what you're saying, is what the judge was saying, is having an individual or a place where all the services or you can connect with all of those. I also now do life coaching for 2 12-year-old boys because I'm trying to keep them out of your system. And I do that as a volunteer as well. And that, once again, is one of those things that is a necessary kind of thing of putting this all together, but I'm looking at corrections and thinking, I certainly hope, Senator, everything goes through, because there's a lot of effort. And as I said, I started working with them 20, 25 years ago, 30 years, and I expected to be much further ahead. And I no longer volunteer in the prison system, but maybe I'll stay with the youth now, so if I can keep them out of the system. But this is very interesting. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and that's why I'm in this chat right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're glad you're on the board. Very happy. We're beginning to run out of time. I think the housing issue is a very important one, and I want to just remind people that the League has been having a series on affordable housing, and our last affordable housing session will be Monday, May 15th at 7 p.m. So, and it really is a problem solving. What can we do about this situation? So I encourage you to mark your calendars. Any other comments or concerns?
A few questions have come in, and I'd like to address a couple of the ones that came in. One is for Senator Pinckney, and that is, what kind of pushback have you received for SB 4?
Really great question. We've gotten a lot of pushback from the DOC around the technical violations piece. That's probably the biggest conflict that we're having right now is, them wanting I would say them framing the bill in a way that seems as though we're taking away their ability to reincarcerate ever at all as an option, and that's not the case. As Judge Butler pointed out, sometimes that is a necessary tool to have in the toolkit. The language simply says that we should exhaust all options that are appropriate prior to going straight to reincarceration. And so there's a lot of pushback from them there, not wanting to see any changes in that specific area. Other pieces of pushback are more along the lines of the fiscal note around the bill and the requirement for different agencies to have to hire more support in order to be able to complete some of the tasks that are in the bill. So it's not necessarily pushback, it's more just it would be difficult in terms of the fiscal responsibility that agencies would take on with some of the things that we have in the bill. And so we're working through that with some of the different agencies on how to change the language and reduce some of the cost barriers for their departments to be able to do some of the things that we have in the bill. We're just kind of changing some of the things in the bill to be able to make it so that we're not getting a really high fiscal note on the bill. And so I would say the tech violation piece is probably the biggest barrier right now, and why we haven't moved forward too much. I am hoping to put the bill in, anticipating to put the bill in committee next week. I'm just waiting on the legislative drafters to get me the amendments that I asked for. And then as long as we get those, the bill will actually be in committee on May 10th at 11 o'clock. Would love to have you all there physically or virtually to be able to testify in support of the bill. And don't forget, you still have the virtual option if you don't want to go all the way down to Dover. And so outside of that's been really the only pushback that I've been receiving. Some questions from different agencies about the length of probation only being a year. And so I am looking at that and seeing, what that might mean. I don't really anticipate making changes there, but we are having at least conversations about when it might be appropriate for people who might need a little bit of a longer time in order to complete some of their programming. So those are the biggest kind of conversation pieces where we've been.
Great, thank you so much. I have one other question I think we'll throw out here, and that is, what is there a way that Del Tech can be associated with the job search? And that's just general, anybody can answer that question.
I know we have a fantastic partnership with Del Tech. They actually
You do
just-
already.
We do,
Okay.
yep. So they and the best part about Del Tech is that their seed scholarship program has expanded the criteria by which individuals can gain some sort of scholarship financial aid. There is a list of offenses that prohibit individuals from receiving that scholarship. However, the application process, it's all self-reported. There's not really a check to it. So I tell individuals, take that how you will, but also make sure that you are differentiating between academic programs and the plethora of workforce programs. They've, had some banks like Barclays Bank and Bank of America sponsor some workforce programs, which are $6,000 programs in like CNA, construction technology, heavy equipment operator, peer support specialist, that a lot of my individuals will take. And they have a variety of class options as well too. So we always try to reach out to Del Tech, and they join all of our public events that DCJ has.
And I would also just want to add to that, I did a legislation last year around banning the box. It was something that Delaware already had in terms of employment, but we did a re-up on that and removed the ability to ask about criminal backgrounds from college applications, and Del Tech was one of the best partners in that process. They were at the table
Great.
from beginning to end and really, really willing to engage and come out in support of that bill. So they were really, really great in that process.
And we need to do a better job at promoting available resources for individuals. So if there is someone connected to the league that is connected to Del Tech, and Del Tech is willing and able to assist individuals with a criminal background with job search, please connect with me through Marjorie or through anyone in the league, and I would be happy to promote the resources at Del Tech and assistance with job search if that's available.
Very good.
Thank you. I think since we're getting toward the end of our session, there are a couple of other questions that came in, but they were pretty much covered by the panel. So thank you.
And that panel has done a wonderful job.
Yes.
Really, really spectacular. Panelists, you do know that the whole session has been recorded, and we'll make that available to people who weren't able to view it firsthand. And I thank you very much. Thank you for a spectacular job,
Thank you very much, Marjorie.
Your Honor.
Thank you all. This was a
Thank
great
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, and thank you.
everyone.